Say there is a lovely valley bordered on one side by mountains and by water on the other. There are resources here that you can't get anywhere else, like gold or jobs and good weather. People start to come and settle. Soon, all the land near the desired resources is taken. Up here, it's cold and hard to build, and out here, it's pretty far from the jobs. But those resources are still there. So people eventually decide it's worth it to live in the hills or farther downstream or with friends and relatives in order to gain some access to the resources in the area. Land is limited, so enterprising landowners try to meet the continuing demand by building up. But the current residents like the area the way it is. They don't want another big apartment building next door. And unlike the people who would like to move into those new apartments, the people who already live there are the ones who have something to lose. And they are the ones who vote. They elect representatives that say, we've built enough. The representatives approve zoning maps that restrict growth. California has basically no state requirements for adding density and no oversight or enforcement mechanism, so zoning policy is local and it is designed to appease the people who already live there, not potential future citizens who might want to live or work there. Zoning large swaths of land as low density is a blessing for homeowners, not just because it preserves the character of their neighborhoods, but because by limiting the supply of new housing, the value of each property is likely to go up more and faster. On the other hand, it's a curse for renters or potential first-time homebuyers who hold no equity and are not protected from rents or housing prices rising each month. If rent control is enacted, it may make the housing crisis worse. It's a good tool to protect communities from being displaced when rents are skyrocketing. However, once in place, rent control is very hard to remove. Those who benefit protect it fiercely. Over the long run, landlords aren't motivated to keep renting below market rate when they can get more somewhere else, and developers aren't keen to build even as demand grows because they know their profit will be limited. Proposition 13 means California homeowners benefit from the property tax equivalent of rent control, with more catastrophic and far-reaching consequences. In the good old days, property values were assessed every year, and property owners paid on average about 3% of that value each year in tax. The tax revenues funded schools, parks, sewers, other local amenities. As property values rose, so did the tax. Voters rebelled against these high costs in 1978 by passing Proposition 13. It limited property taxes to 1% of the purchase price of the property and only allowed a 2% increase in the tax each year. Just to keep up with inflation, it would have to increase close to 4% per year. Prop 13 was written to protect low-income homeowners, but because it was applied to all property in the state, both commercial and residential, the effects have been far-reaching. Say I bought a house in 1975 for $40,000. In 2005, 30 years later, it's probably worth about $400,000. So when I bought the house in 1975, my property tax would be $400 a year, 1% of the purchase price. By 2005, 30 years later, I'd be paying about $700 in property tax. Just to keep up with inflation, my property tax would have to be closer to $1,500 a year. If I sell my house for that $400,000, the new owners will pay 1% of their purchase price, or $4,000. That's $3,300 a year more than me. As a result of this system, California homeowners really don't like to move. Since property tax is based on purchase price, property tax goes way up if I buy a new home, so I'm likely to stay put and not sell, even if it's no longer the right place for me. Furthermore, the tax isn't keeping up with inflation, so every year the city collects less money and has less services available. The tax is low enough that revenues from a new development usually won't cover the cost of its residents, which strains an already underfunded system. So, California residents often oppose development in order to preserve the services they do receive, and they are especially protective of schools. In an effort to offset the burden of new development, cities have found one point in time they can gather funds to try to cover costs for the entire life of the citizen, right when they move in. This leads to cripplingly high entry fees, often in the form of development impact fees and building permit fees. In high-end markets, these can amount to more than $100,000 per unit of housing. If you, as a single-family homeowner, are just looking to build a second house on your lot, for example, you'll have to pay those fees up front before building the house. This is a major deterrent, so your neighborhood may effectively be kept at an even lower density than it's zoned for. If you're a large-scale builder, cities might ask you to fund parks, fire stations, new transit infrastructure. Developers should absolutely pay for the impact of their buildings, but right now they are also being asked to subsidize homeowners whose property taxes don't cover their ongoing costs to the city. This is also why cities in California fight much harder to bring in jobs than to build homes. Since property tax is limited and local income tax will benefit the cities with the jobs, not the cities where the people live, workers are much more valuable to cities than residents. In the Bay Area, this has led to an imbalance where 1 unit of housing is created for every 10 new jobs. Developers rarely fund their own projects. They're financed by banks. So when the recession hit in 2008, funding for development disappeared. Construction came to a halt, and a lot of the workforce left. The economy has improved, but the workers haven't come back. On top of the labor shortage, wildfires in 2017 burned nearly 10,000 structures in the state. That's 10,000 structures that will need replacing before we even begin to expand the supply of housing. The high demand and the limited builders means that they can charge a lot for their services. The cost of construction for multifamily housing right now is frequently over $500 per square foot. That means it costs at least $500,000 just for construction when developing a 1,000 square foot apartment, not including land or fees, making that unit highly unaffordable. The housing shortage is a really sticky situation. If the plentiful jobs and good weather keep attracting people, competition for the limited housing supply will continue. As with any competition, there are people who lose out. In this case, it's those who don't earn enough money to make rent. They are increasingly ending up in their cars, on friends' couches, or on the street. The concentrated interest of current landowner residents and diffuse costs to society as a whole can make the problem look pretty insurmountable. There are measures we can take to decrease demand, like building a wall or raising taxes. Jobs are actually leaving on their own as big companies relocate to urban centers where talented workers are more affordable. But mostly, we need to increase supply. If you're interested in helping, write letters to your elected officials and tell them you want more housing. Show up to city council meetings and champion new housing developments. Learn how your city creates its zoning maps and see if you can join the planning commission. And I know this is a hard one, but if you are a low-density homeowner in California, think hard about whether keeping your view of the mountains or having less traffic or fewer kids in each classroom is more important to you than getting and keeping people housed. Residential development has to go somewhere, and if you can say yes to development near you, you are saying welcome to families who really have nowhere to go. It's not hard to play an active role in restoring an ecosystem where teachers, nurses, fire, and police officers live in your community, but you have to voice your support to your city in order to create that healthier, more equitable future for California, where everyone, not just the wealthy, have a chance to thrive.